thank you for coming today. We'll just wait 1 minute while he finishes handing out the statements.
There's a couple. Yeah, they're all different. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, sure.
Thank you. It's 4 of them, correct?
It is 5.
5.
Here's Chrissy.
Oh,
Oh, sorry.
sorry.
You said there were 5.
Yeah, it's supposed to be 5.
You have 5.
No, wait. Oh, we have 4.
Yeah.
I have Gloria.
We have 5.
Jerry, Randy,
I have Brandy.
Chrissy, and Gloria.
Jerry, Brandy, Chrissy, Gloria, Kym.
Kym is the one. Yeah, Kym's the one we don't have.
I don't have names.
Okay, well, we can start without him, and then we can email everybody there, anything that's not there. Okay, tell me when you're ready, Sam. Ready? All right, thank you for coming today. I'm attorney Gloria Allred, and each of the other pageant winners who are at the table will introduce themselves and tell you which state they represented. Recently, I was shocked to hear that certain African American pageant winners who participated in the Mrs. America pageant in August 2018 alleged that they had been subjected to racially insensitive comments during their participation in the Mrs. America pageant in Las Vegas, Nevada. These comments were very hurtful to them because they allege they were made by David Marmel, who is the executive director and co-founder of the Mrs. America pageant. They allege that during a conversation with Mr. Marmel, he subjected them to listening to racial stereotypes about African American women and African American men. These comments, although allegedly used in a conversation with some of these African American contestants, were also overheard by a Caucasian state pageant winner who happened to be seated behind Mr. Marmel. After the conversation ended, many of those who had been a part of the conversation with Mr. Marmel called their family members and others to express their shock and pain regarding what they stated that they heard. Today, they've decided that it would be wrong to stay silent about this matter. They feel that it is their duty to share what they allege was their experience, because they do not want next year's contestants to be subjected to what they consider to be racially offensive and demeaning comments which have hurt them and caused them so much pain. I commend all of the Mrs. America state pageant winners who are here today and who have found the courage to speak. For them, participating in the Mrs. America pageant was a prestigious opportunity for which they had paid thousands of dollars in order to compete. They deserve to be treated with dignity and respect, rather than being subjected to what they felt was humiliating treatment by the co-founder and owner of the Mrs. America pageant. We ask Mr. Marmel not to provide excuses or rationalizations for what these Mrs. America state pageant winners allege that he said in front of them on that day in August 2018, a day that they will never forget. Instead, we ask him to acknowledge what they allege, that he said, take responsibility for it, and apologize to them. We also ask that he develop a plan of action, which would include sensitivity training focused on the issue of racial bias and racial stereotypes, so that what they allege they were subjected to never happens again. My clients have no plans to file a claim or a lawsuit or to seek damages. They simply want the Mrs. America pageant to be a place where everyone is respected, is treated equally, and feels safe. We look forward to Mr. Marmel's response. Go ahead.
All right, my name is Kimberly Phillips. I'm Mrs. Delaware America 2018. On Tuesday, August 21st, 2018, the contestants for Mrs. America were given a party within the Elvis Suite at the Westgate Resort and Casino in Las Vegas, Nevada. The suite consists of several open rooms conjoined to an open area for refreshments. During this event, I sat sitting with another Mrs. America state winner in one of the side open rooms. Across the same room, Mrs. Ohio was sitting down directly facing us. The other state winner and I were talking about the weekly events when David Marmel sat down across from us on a large coffee table. He began by asking us if we were enjoying our time at Mrs. America. We quickly replied that we were having an amazing time and thanked him for all that the organization had done for us throughout the week. It was at that time Mrs. Missouri and Mrs. New Jersey were walking by. Mr. Marmel motioned and asked for them to come over and join us. Mrs. Missouri gladly came over and sat down next to him on the table. Mrs. New Jersey came into the room but sat down further away from us. At that point, Mr. Marmel asked if he could be frank with us. We all stated yes, and he began talking about a man he knew who grew up in the projects with 2 siblings to raise. He stated that the man he considered whether he should sell drugs or be in a gang. Instead, he decided to go to West Point and is now his attorney. He then said that it is not the 1960s anymore, and black people can't rely on the government for assistance. He also stated that all black women need to stop having babies with 4 baby daddies, and all black men are in jail because they need to stop selling drugs and killing each other. He then stopped and asked Mrs. New Jersey to come sit closer to us. I heard her say that she had already heard this before, but all 3 of the other women also asked, as myself, also asked Mrs. New Jersey to come closer again, and so she got up and sat closer to everyone. Mr. Marmel began to ask us if we knew who had created the African American Achievement Awards. The other state winners with whom I had spoken stated that it was him, and he asked how we knew. She stated that she had done her research, although he had already told all 52 ladies at dinner during orientation night. We all thanked him for what he had done. He then began to talk about how he had started thinking of creating the awards because he would travel often when he played baseball, and he would pick up the Ebony magazine and see the top 100 influential black people. He said that he thought to himself that neither black nor white kids knew them, so he decided to create the award show. He said that he knew the owners of Ebony magazine and that they were the most racist people he had ever met because they all used the term nigger freely with each other. He then placed his arm next to Mrs. Missouri and said that it was okay because they called him brother, so we were all family. He went on to say that he also used to say this because while playing baseball, he would see signs. He was used to saying this because while playing baseball, he would see signs that said, "No niggers, no Jews." After this, he started talking about how he had already had plenty of Mrs. Americas who were black, to which we all replied in unison, "One." He also stated that he had plenty of runner-ups, and we all said too. He was going to say something else, but the other state winner with whom I had been speaking cut him off and said, "Well, cheers to number 2. It was at that point we all the ladies toasted their glass to one another. He then said, "Well, I really don't give an F who wins. You should all just be grateful for this experience." It was at that point we all looked silently at each other. There may have been small talk for another minute, but then he ended up leaving the conversation by saying that was all he had to say. Mrs. Ohio then came over from across the small room and stated that she could not believe what had just happened. She stated that she was so upset for all of us and that we all each deserved to win because of the classy and respectful manner in which we handled the situation when we were clearly being disrespected. As we were discussing what had occurred, the Mrs. America photographer came over and asked to take a picture of all of us. After she took the picture and left, we all agreed that this was a memory we would never forget. I spoke to my roommate, my husband, and my director that very night about what happened, as well as speaking about it to 3 other state winners directly afterwards. I was upset, but more so saddened. After spending 2 years and thousands of dollars on this organization, I felt as if I did not have a chance simply because of the color of my skin. Although I felt my chances of winning were now non-existent, I still continued on because I had never been a quitter. I did not want to let my family, friends, students, and most importantly, my state down. We all decided to push this aside and not say anything. However, I was informed the week after the pageant that we were being accused of lying and simply because we did not win or place within the competition. Originally, we weren't going to say anything because, again, we all thought who would believe us if we came forward after the pageant. People would think we were just upset about either not winning or placing the way we wanted. As Mrs. Delaware America, I plan to continue representing my state for the remainder of my 2018 title. As a local and state title holder within the Mrs. Delaware America pageant system, I have enjoyed competing and representing my city and state for the past 2 years. I'm hoping that by sharing my story, changes will occur within the Mrs. America pageant system. The ladies who stand with me today are incredibly strong and resilient. We will never be defined or limited by our age, height, weight, or ethnicity. We are strong, we are beautiful, and we will never be silenced by anything or anyone. Thank you.
I think let's just have you 2 change.
Yes.
Good afternoon. My name is Brandy Palacio, and I am the state representative for Missouri America. I'm the current representative for the state of Missouri in the 2018 Mrs. America system. On August 18, 2018, I left for a week's stay in order to participate in the 2018 Mrs. America pageant, which was held at the Westgate Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas, Nevada. Throughout my stay there, we attended many functions, including a function on August 21st, 2018 at the Elvis Suite. In attendance of this event were all 52 contestants and the current Mrs. America. Hosting the event were the owners of the pageant, Mr. David Marmel and Elaine Marmel. Unbeknownst to us, also in attendance were several of the judges who will be conducting our interviews the next day. During this time, while at the function, I noticed Mr. Marmel sitting with 4 other women outside of the main group. In that group were Mrs. Delaware, Mrs. New Jersey, and another state pageant winner. Mrs. Ohio was sitting nearby. Mr. Marmel noticed me looking over towards the group and called me over to sit right next to him on his left side. When I sat down, he began to have a conversation on what he had done for the Black community, including developing a program called the Black Achievement Awards, founded by the founder of Ebony magazine. As he spoke, he diverted the conversation to his concern about athletes kneeling for the flag and how that was disrespectful. He stated how he had fought in the Vietnam War alongside Black men, and this was a slap in their faces. He continued with the conversation by stating that Black men need to stop shooting each other, and black women need to stop having so many babies. He went on to describe a black friend who brought himself up out of poverty and said that he makes no excuses and there is no room for others to make excuses during this time. He said that when he played baseball in the 1960s down in Alabama and Florida, there were signs that read, "No Jews or niggers allowed." We were shocked by his language during this conversation, and none of the ladies said anything, including myself. He went on to say how he worked in the newsroom for Ebony magazine, and that was one of the most racist places he worked. He said that they would use the word nigger throughout his time working there, and they gave him a pass to use it because they were brothers. At this point, he rolled up his sleeve and put his arm next to mine in order to compare skin color. He continued about the importance of the program that he had developed with the founder of Ebony magazine, and then stated that during this time, our pageant has had black winners. Simultaneously, all of the contestants whom he was speaking with said the name of that one contestant who had previously won, Miss Austin Williams. He then backed up and said, we've had also some first place winners, and we also said that person's name, which happens to be the director of the Delaware pageant. He ended our conversation with how he hoped we would have a good pageant and interview, then he left. The ladies and I gathered our thoughts and began to express our disappointment in his outright disrespect and callous thoughts. I was highly disappointed after we left the function, which was about 8:30 p.m. I explained what had happened to my roommate, who was Mrs. Kansas, and also the third runner-up for this year's pageant, and also I called my parents and my husband.
Good afternoon. My name is Chrissy Timpson, and I am Mrs. New Jersey America 2018. The first day when I met David Marmel, I was in total shock. He introduced himself to me in the national office with Elaine Marmel, his wife and pageant co-founder, the Mrs. America contestant coordinator, and the Mrs. America videographer. We went to the office, and Elaine and the Mrs. America contestant coordinator greeted me. A few minutes later, David walked in and introduced himself to me. David sat down at the table, and he said that he didn't believe I was from New Jersey. He asked, what part? So I responded and I laughed, and he still said he didn't believe me. The conversation continued, and he asked about my husband and what he does. I told him my husband is in the military, and he proudly serves in the United States Air Force. He went on to tell me how he had served. I thought that was going to be the end of the conversation, but then he said, and I quote, "The asshole who kneels needs to stop disrespecting my flag." I know my face looked shocked because I wasn't expecting that, and I thought David understood why Colin Kaepernick knelt. I guess I was being a little naive because I was still on cloud 9 from actually being in Vegas for the Mrs. America pageant. David then went on to say, if you people want to protest, do it at a police station, not at a football game. I gathered my thoughts because I was trying to stay calm. I told David that he missed the point of the true meaning of kneeling, and it wasn't because Kaepernick wanted to disrespect the American flag. It was more because of police brutality. I then told him that I am a police brutality survivor myself. I had called 911, and then I was attacked by police. I told this man that my whole family has served in the military, and it is currently serving in the military. And not one time did we feel that it was disrespectful that he knelt down. David changed the subject and said, well, you people need to stop killing each other. We need people to bring up the black community. He told me he understands because he was the director of the first African American Achievement Awards. He told me that you black women need to stop having babies and having 4 baby daddies. Your men are drug dealers. Incarcerated in jail, you are on welfare and killing each other. He then pointed out about the fact that the most racist people he came into contact with were the editors at Ebony and Jet magazine. He lifted up his sleeve to show me his tan skin color and told me that the editors of the magazines called him brother and how they would call each other niggers, and it was okay to say it because they called him brother. I feel that it is never okay to say that. At this point, I looked around, and Elaine and the Mrs. America contestant coordinator were silent, and the Mrs. America videographer was shaking his head in agreement. David then talked about his career as a baseball player and how it's not the 60s anymore and there are no government agencies to help you people. I didn't understand what he was implying after that statement. He then said he remembered the water fountain saying, I quote, "No niggers, no Jews," and that he understands my community and we should be thankful he put on the award show. Then he talked about his hero and how at 16 he didn't have food and he had to take care of his siblings, and how instead of going to the streets he finished school, and how today he is his best friend and attorney. He told me if he could overcome that, there's no excuse for other black people. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. David then said this is one of his best years because there were so many black women in his pageant this year. David pulled me aside and told me to let the other black women know what has been done for us and our community. Finally, I checked into the VIP desk. I sat with Mrs. America videographer, and he told me that he thought David really liked me and I didn't know what to say. The Mrs. America videographer felt the same way as David about kneeling and the black community. I went up to my room to call my husband and my mom, and I told them everything. And then I just let it go. I knew no one would believe my encounter. Then Elvis dinner finally came, and I was having a beautiful time when I noticed that Mrs. Delaware, another state winner, Mrs. Missouri, and Mrs. Ohio were sitting with David. David saw me come over, but I was sitting directly behind him, and so was Jerry, Mrs. Ohio, just towards the left side. I don't think he even noticed she was there. She was on her phone at the time. I knew something was going to happen, so I sat there. I thought to myself, please don't say the offensive and racist things you said to me to all of them. He then began. He said, ladies, this isn't the 60s anymore. There aren't government agencies to help you people. He said, and I quote, you black women need to stop having babies. 4 baby daddies, your men are drug dealers, are incarcerated and in jail. You people are on welfare. There's so much black on black crime. After that, another state winner told me to come sit next to her, and I told her I was good. David then turned around and told me, no, Jersey, come sit over here where I can see you. I know we discussed this on the first day. I got up and I sat next to the winner who asked me to sit next to her. David went on to say again that he made the African American Achievement Awards, and we should be thankful for what he has done for the black community. He talked about the asshole who knelt and disrespected his flag. Then he said how the most racist people he ever met were the niggers at Ebony and Jet magazines. He rolled his sleeve up and took Mrs. Missouri's arm and said, since we are family, it's okay to say that because they call me brother. He then said again, ladies, this isn't the 60s anymore, and talked about his career in baseball and at the water fountain that read, no niggers, no Jews. He then said that he's already had one black Mrs. America, and at this time, Mrs. Delaware said, wow. And he turned to her and said, well, it's the truth. I've already had one. At that moment, each one of us couldn't believe what happened. Mrs. Ohio, Jerry, got up out of her seat and sat on the table, and I saw tears filling her eyes. She couldn't believe what he just said. The rest of us were numb because even though for some this was the first encounter with him, this personally was my second. I was thankful it happened. I was thankful because I had other women who experienced what happened to me on day one. As I started to share my experience with the ladies, the Mrs. America photographer came over and told us to pose for a photo, and that photo we will never forget. I was tired and then mentally and emotionally exhausted. I was distraught in my room, crying to my husband, packing up my things, and my roommate tried to console me. I felt like I was trapped. I was thankful that Jerry and Mrs. Ohio was there, but we all felt if anyone would say anything, we would get in trouble. I couldn't contact my director because her husband was ill in the hospital at the time. Other ladies did tell their directors, and even now before I came forward, their directors don't believe them. My director doesn't seem to believe me, even after I got into contact with her. She told me she had black queens before, and they've never said anything. I told her her past queens have reached out to me and told me their story and how she felt like they couldn't say anything to her. We paid thousands of dollars. Our families were flying in. I felt that if we said anything about the shocking comments made to us, that we couldn't be on the Mrs. America stage, that we worked so hard to finally get to, so we all stayed quiet. We put it back in our heads and let it go so we could still go on stage. Originally, we weren't going to say anything because, again, we thought, who would believe us? If we came forward after the pageant, people would think we were just upset about either not winning or placing the way we wanted. Later, David accused us of lying. He denied everything and said it didn't happen. He said we were trying to ruin him, and he said all he did was try to connect with us. But it did happen, and we all decided as a group we will not be told to not talk about this anymore and be made to look like we made this up or are upset over a pageant. As soon as others heard about it, I had women, past queens, reach out to me because they knew what happened to me and us. They told me their experiences and what they felt was conduct that discriminated against them and how they stayed quiet. The women told me how proud they were because we decided to finally say what they wish they could have said when they competed. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Jerry Ward. I'm the current Mrs. Ohio America 2018. On August 21st, 2018, in Las Vegas, Nevada, I was living my 24-year-old childhood dream of participating in a national level pageant, all while representing a state that I'm so proud to call home. The opportunity to participate at the Mrs. America pageant was literally my dream come true, and an honor that as a long-term pageant career contestant, I take very seriously. After a full day of strenuous but fun rehearsals, the other contestants and I were anxiously awaiting the evening event. Every night at the Westgate Resort and Casino, where the pageant was being held, the contestants were provided a fabulous dining experience, as well as a lot of laughs and memories to treasure forever. This night in particular, my fellow contestants and I were treated like royalty within the Elvis Suite on the penthouse level of the resort. As a fine live band played and hors d'oeuvres were served, all the contestants, hotel staff, pageant staff, and judges mingled throughout the common area. After 4 consistent days of being in 6-inch heels for a majority of the day, I decided I needed to save my feet for the preliminary competition, which was happening the next day. I saw that in a room connected to the center of the suite was an extended open sitting area with 6 contestants present and 1 open seat. I sat down in this room in a large armchair and began to speak with some of the other contestants. Because we were actively posting our excitement and adventures on social media, I began to check my phone as I was receiving more notifications than I could begin to imagine. People drifted in and out of this room, continuing to mingle as I sat reading all the social media well wishes from my friends and family. I've never felt more loved than I did in that moment. Within 10 minutes of my sitting down and addressing social media, I noticed that Mr. Marmel entered the room where I and the other contestants were sitting together. Because of the circular shape of the room, my individual seat was behind where Mr. Marmel entered, and he did not turn around to see that I was present as he addressed the women directly in front of him. I heard Mr. Marmel address the contestants sitting in the room with pleasantries and ask if he could sit down, to which the contestants said yes. I continued to scroll through my phone while he sat on the coffee table in the center of the room to speak with the women directly in front of him. I was not tuned into the conversation until I heard, quote, "This is not the 1960s. There are no government agencies to help you people. I know your black men are criminals who need to stop shooting each other, and these black women need to stop having babies," end quote. I immediately looked up and made direct eye contact with Mrs. Delaware, who at the same time glanced over the shoulder of Mr. Marmel and made direct eye contact with me. Mr. Marmel quickly continued on from the aforementioned statement to speaking about the NFL, stating, quote, "You need to tell the brothers to stop kneeling and disrespecting my flag and the people that serve the nation," end quote. I looked back down at my phone in an attempt to gain composure. Mr. Marmel continued, stating that he played professional baseball, and when he did so, there were signs throughout the stadium stating "No Jews," and although I will not be stating it here today, no N-words. By this point, I was shocked beyond belief. Mr. Marmel reported that he worked in the newsroom at Ebony Magazine and how it was the most racist office. And within this office, they would use the N-word freely, as he got a pass to use that word because they were brothers. The room became quiet for a brief second, and I looked up to notice that Mr. Marmel was rolling up the sleeves to his black, unbuttoned blazer jacket, followed by the white button-up shirt sleeves underneath the jacket. Mr. Marmel then raised up his arm next to Mrs. Missouri, who was sitting on the far left side of him, as to compare their skin color. He laughed, but he was the only one laughing. At this point, I set my phone down on my lap in disbelief for what had just happened directly in front of me. Mr. Marmel put his arm back down from Mrs. Missouri's side and spoke proudly of the program he developed with the founder of Ebony magazine, and continued in stating that, quote, even during our generation, Mrs. America has had black winners, end quote. All at once, the 4 contestants in front of him stated that Mrs. America's name in unison, reiterating the fact that despite Mr. Marmel stating multiple Mrs. Americas that were African American, there has only been one. To which Mr. Marmel stated, quote, we've also had some first runner-ups, end quote. Once again in unison, the women were able to say the name of the single African American first runner-up's name, as she is the only one and also Mrs. Delaware's director. Casually, Mr. Marmel stood up from the coffee table where he was seated and told the women that he hopes they have enjoyed their Mrs. America experience, and he hopes that they all enjoy the upcoming preliminary competition. Mr. Marmel then left the room, leaving the 5 of us sitting there staring in silence at one another. I couldn't move, and I couldn't speak. For the first time in my entire 30 years of life, I was absolutely frozen. If you know me, the inability for me to speak my mind is unheard of. Never in my life have I felt powerless. Until this moment. I've never firsthand experienced an entire culture of people so blatantly and inaccurately stereotyped in a 10-minute conversation. I was appalled, and all of a sudden, I was guilty. I became overwhelmingly devastated that within that conversation, I was weak and a part of the problem. I did not stand up for these brilliant, kind, loving, funny, and incredible women when they needed me the most. And I was just as guilty as the man who was saying these horrible things to them. The women and I spoke very little immediately following Mr. Marmel's conversation, mostly because we didn't know what to say. I'm unsure we had words available to express what had just happened. I hugged each of the women, and as I became teary-eyed, realized that I needed to leave the event early. I made it to the elevator without crying, but as the elevator attendant closed the doors, I began to cry while another contestant present became immediately concerned, hugging me as I explained what had just occurred. I made it back to my room and began to pack my things for competition for the following day, mostly to distract myself and attempt to refocus on the task that was at hand. A couple of hours later, my roommate came back into her room, noticing that I was still visibly upset and crying. I told her about the conversation, to which she was upset as well. She couldn't believe that the conversation had even occurred. That night, I finally laid down at 1 a.m., completely unable to sleep at all during that night. The following morning, I went to my hair and makeup artist's room to have my hair and makeup worked on for that day. During this session, I told my hair and makeup artist and costume creator about the conversation from the previous night. To which one artist stated that she's not surprised that he said this, as she has, quote, heard many stories from previous years about things he has said to contestants, end quote. I did not speak of the conversation while at the pageant, as we did not know who to trust with the information. The other contestants and I leaned on one another during this time to make it through the remainder of the week in an attempt to enjoy our pageant experience, which we had worked so hard to obtain. When I returned home to Ohio post the Mrs. America pageant, I told my husband about what had happened, crying again at the conversation the women had to endure and my inability to stand up for them in that moment. I'm here today as a thankfully placed bystander from that night. I'm here today because in an environment that is supposed to encourage, uplift, and support women, the exact opposite happened. I'm here today because I witnessed firsthand my friends feel uncomfortable, belittled, and devastated. And I'm here today because I have a moral and social responsibility to fellow members of society to ensure that they feel safe and loved as they deserve it. I was unable to speak then, but I'm able to speak now. I'm here to state that as a society, we need to have more conversations on kindness, respect, and a greater curiosity to understand people and cultures. This unfortunate occurrence that took place at Mrs. America is only a single example of how many African Americans are made to feel every single day while just trying to navigate through life. Although beauty pageants are a small world, they are important, and they deserve to be a place of inclusion, equality, and cultural awareness. Furthermore, it's important to educate society on cultural appropriation and start having real conversations about what cultural appropriation looks like. The words used in the conversation that night were not to be borrowed from another culture and used in satire. The conversation that took place that evening never should have happened. Not only was it inappropriate, but it was also unnecessary. As sister queens, friends, women, and most importantly, fellow human beings, I happily support the conversation of what the Mrs. America organization can do to better ensure that no more women leave a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity feeling less than the amazing women that they are. I fully believe and live by Maya Angelou's quote in stating that dignity means that I deserve the best treatment that I can get, and I have the responsibility to give the best treatment I can to other people. I hope that I encourage these women to come forward and speak about their experience. I hope that the courage these women have had to come forward and speak about their experiences sparks a greater conversation and change in the pageant world for what equality and inclusion truly look like. Because this conversation that we are having here today is about so much more than just a beauty pageant. I would like to publicly apologize to these women for my inability to speak up during that time due to my own weaknesses. And I'd like to encourage Mr. Marmel to also apologize for the way that his words made these women feel that evening. As humans, we all make mistakes and bad decisions. But a larger part of being human is growing from those mistakes and owning your wrongdoings. Today, it is my genuine hope that we all leave this conversation humbly growing in knowledge, acceptance, and respect for one another, as despite what society may present, we're all beautifully equal. Thank you for your time.
We're going to take some questions, but just to let you know, we also have photos for you. Why don't we each hold up our own photos? Okay. Let's stand up. Stand up. You want to stand up?
Yeah, sure. That's
Yeah, okay, stand closer. These will be available afterwards as well. So we're happy to take some questions if you have some. I'm sorry. Could you identify yourself so we can hear you?
Yes, Shari Wilkins, we are post.
thank you so much for sharing your story. So you stated before that, you know, you're not seeking any damages, you're not seeking a lawsuit out of this. But what do you think the organization should do, and how should they deal with Mr. Marmel and his comments?
Well, I think the first step is for Mr. Marmel to take responsibility and to acknowledge what they allege that he said. And after that, he could apologize. And then he and the organization should make a plan of action. And the plan of action should include sensitivity training in reference to racial bias and stereotyping for Mr. Marmel and for any other executive who they think might benefit from it. That's what I think should be done. I think all of these wonderful, brave pageant winners have expressed that they did enjoy participating in the Mrs. America pageant. They would like to see it continue, but they don't want any other contestant to have to be subjected to what they allege that they were subjected to. Would anyone like to speak to that? Would you like to say anything about that? We even need to speak into the microphone, so I'm going to stand up and so that anyone wants to say anything.
I agree with Ms. Allred, what she just said. We personally feel that we would like an apology, and honestly, we just don't want this to happen to any other woman again.